The will of Queen Charlotte. The fate of Queen Charlotte's estate remains somewhat ambiguous due to the uncertainty surrounding whether she ever drafted a will during her lifetime. It is possible she never considered it necessary, assuming that she may not outlive her husband, thereby leaving most of her possessions to him. During the long 18th century, many women did not outlive their husbands, largely due to the perils of childbirth. Remarkably, despite spending almost 12 years of her life pregnant, Queen Charlotte defied these odds and lived to the age of 74. Even as her husband descended into madness, she clung to the hope of his recovery, which might explain her delay in drafting a will. However, by autumn 1818, her eldest son alerted her to the severity of her health decline, with the doctors giving little hope for recovery. In early May 1818, after a particularly severe seizure, her private secretary, Lieutenant General Sir Herbert Taylor, strongly advised her to create a will. Though she initially refused, General Taylor began cataloguing her possessions in preparation. Throughout the summer, he presented several drafts to the Queen, but she remained resistant. By early November, as her condition worsened, the Prince Regent was informed by her physicians of the urgency of her situation. He then visited Kew Palace and advised his mother to settle her affairs while she still had the strength. Acknowledging the grim prognosis, Queen Charlotte, not one to be overly sentimental, finally conceded the necessity of making a will. She summoned General Taylor, who brought the most recent draft, and despite her frailty, they worked together to ensure all bequests met her approval. The Queen, still hopeful for her husband's recovery, insisted on a clause returning all of her jewels to King George III should he regain his faculties and outlive her. On Monday, November 16, 1818, General Taylor finalised and prepared a clean copy of the will. Queen Charlotte, with considerable effort, signed it that same day. The will was witnessed by her doctors Sir Francis Milman and Sir Henry Halford, along with a messenger sent by the Prince Regent to inquire about her health. General Taylor, undoubtedly relieved to have the will properly completed and witnessed, saw its timing as crucial. Queen Charlotte passed away the following afternoon, just a day after signing her will. On Tuesday, December 1, 1818, Queen Charlotte's will was validated at Doctors' Commons just a day before her funeral. In Britain, the validation process known as proving a will required confirmation of the document's authenticity by a church court within 4 months of the deceased's death. This typically involved the executors and at least one witness appearing before a court official to affirm the will's legitimacy, after which the executors were granted the legal authority to manage the deceased estate. Queen Charlotte's executors were General Taylor and Baron Arden, the elder brother of the late Prime Minister Spencer. The Queen's personal property, excluding Crown possessions, was valued at just under £140,000. She had instructed that her debts, as well as the legacies and annuities for her servants and courtiers specified in her will, be paid from her own funds. If her funds were insufficient, the necessary amount was to be raised through the sale of her personal property. Queen Charlotte was aware that her sons and married daughters were financially provided for, so she left the majority of her estate to her 4 youngest daughters, Princesses Augusta, Elizabeth, Mary, and Sophia. These inheritances were designated for their sole benefit and were to remain their independent property, even in the event of marriage. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Mary eventually married during the Regency period, while Princess Augusta and Princess Sophia remained single. The Frogmore estate, located within Windsor Home Park, was bequeathed to Princess Augusta, with a stipulation that if the upkeep became too costly, the property would revert to the Crown in exchange for its cash value. Princess Augusta also inherited all the livestock, furnishings and fixtures at Frogmore House. She was delighted with Frogmore and resided there for the remainder of her life, often hosting her sisters for extended visits. After death, the property did revert to the Crown and became part of the Windsor estate. Queen Charlotte's other property at Windsor, the Lower Lodge estate, was left to her youngest daughter, Princess Sophia. However, since Princess Sophia preferred living in London, she seldom spent time at the country house that she inherited from her mother. Queen Charlotte's most prized possessions were not her estates at Windsor, but her extensive collection of jewels. In her will, she meticulously divided them into 3 distinct categories: those purchased by King George III at their marriage for £50,000, the exquisite Indian diamonds, and various other jewels that she had acquired over the years. She included a provision that if King George III regained his mental faculties, the jewels he had given her would be returned to him. Otherwise, they were to pass to his German relatives, the House of Hanover. The Arcot diamonds mentioned in the second category had a fascinating history. These flawless, pure white diamonds were likely mined in southern India in the 17th century. The collection featured 5 large brilliants, either oval or pear-shaped, weighing between 23 and 38 carats. They were named after their donor, Muhammad Ali Khan, who gifted them to Queen Charlotte in 1777 as gratitude for King George III and the British East India Company's support of his rule. One of the Arcot diamonds reached Queen Charlotte through an unusual series of events. During a reception in India, the gifter wore a ring set with one of the large diamonds. When Thomas Rumbold, the British governor of the province, admired the ring and asked for a closer look, he handed it over. Rumbold then placed the ring on his finger and thanked him for the gift. Despite his protests, Rumbold kept the ring, leveraging the need for British support. However, Colonel Sir Alexander Crosby, stationed in Madras and disapproving of his actions, devised a plan to reclaim the diamond. He persuaded them to write a letter to Queen Charlotte, offering her the ring as a symbol of gratitude. The letter arrived in Britain ahead of Rumbold, who, upon visiting the King and Queen, was compelled to present the ring to Charlotte. The third category in Queen Charlotte's will compromised jewels that she had received as gifts or purchased herself. She directed that all jewels in the second and third categories be sold, with the proceeds divided equally among her 4 daughters. However, it appears the Prince Regent had other plans, disregarding his mother's wishes and the well-being of his sisters. The executors of Queen Charlotte's will, burdened with numerous official duties, were slow to address the provisions of her estate. Their primary focus was settling her debts and ensuring the annuity she had specified, which took several months to complete. During this period, the Queen's jewels, particularly the diamonds, were largely overlooked. However, the Prince Regent, known for his desire for valuable jewels, kept them in mind. Though it is uncertain if he deliberately delayed the will's administration, it is clear that he intended to claim his mother's jewels as his own. This opportunity arose in January 1820, after the death of King George III. Upon his father's passing, the new King George IV declared all of George III's property, including Queen Charlotte's jewels, as his private possessions, not assets of the Crown. He disregarded his mother's bequest of the jewels to the House of Hanover, asserting that as the King of Hanover, they rightfully belonged to him. George IV had the larger Arcot diamonds removed from their settings to adorn a new crown that he commissioned for himself. He retained most of the Queen's other jewels, but rarely wore them. Consequently, despite Queen Charlotte's wishes, her 4 daughters never received any proceeds from the sale of her jewels. George IV appropriated them as his personal property, ignoring his sisters' requests to honour their mother's will. Meanwhile, Queen Charlotte's other personal belongings were auctioned off at Christie's from May to August 1819. This extensive sale included her clothing, snuff collection, personal items, household linens, china, silver, furniture, books, prints, and drawings. Among the auctioned items was a fringe-making machine from 1790s, which Queen Charlotte had owned and used. This machine has survived and was sold by Bonhams in the 21st century. It remains unclear if the proceeds from these sales were distributed to the four royal princesses, as directed by their mother's will. Hopefully, they did receive these funds, since her brother had denied them the income from the jewels. George IV retained his mother's jewels until his death in June 1830. After his passing, the largest Arcot diamonds were removed from his crown and set into a new crown for Queen Adelaide, wife of King William IV. Following King William's death in 1837, the Arcot diamonds were eventually sold at auction, but the proceeds did not seem to benefit the surviving royal princesses. The diamonds were purchased by Robert Grosvenor, the first Marquis of Westminster, and stayed with the Grosvenor family until June 1959. At that time, the third Duke of Westminster sold them to pay death duties after his father's passing. The American jeweller Harry Winston bought the Arcot diamonds, recutting the two largest stones to enhance their clarity and brilliance. These were set into rings sold to private clients in Texas. The diamonds resurfaced in 1993 when Van Cleef & Arpels purchased them. The largest stone, the pear-shaped Arcot, was set as a pendant in a necklace and sold to a Saudi jeweller. The current whereabouts of the other Arcot diamonds, once owned by Queen Charlotte, are unknown. After George IV's death, his brother William IV held Queen Charlotte's wedding diamonds, given to her by King George III, and bequeathed to the House of Hanover. However, upon William IV's passing, the Hanoverian throne passed to their younger brother, Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland. Queen Victoria, who had ascended to the British throne, could not inherit the Hanoverian throne due to Salic law, which prohibited female succession in Hanover. Queen Victoria had grown quite attached to a necklace and some other jewels from Queen Charlotte's collection and wore them frequently. When her uncle, the new King of Hanover, demanded these jewels as his rightful inheritance, she refused. Ernest Augustus then initiated a legal battle to reclaim the jewels, and after a protracted legal struggle lasting 20 years, a court ruled in favour of Hanover in 1857, and Queen Charlotte's wedding jewels were sent to Hanover. Before parting with the diamonds, Queen Victoria had the court jeweller replicate her favourite pieces. She bequeathed these copies to the Crown, and they are now part of the British Crown Jewels. Interestingly, a piece of Queen Charlotte's wedding jewels rejoined the British Royal Collection in 1909. This piece is a ring featuring a miniature profile of King George III, painted by Jeremiah Mayer for use on British coinage. The portrait is encased in a flat-cut diamond and surrounded by small rose diamonds. It is believed that Queen Charlotte wore this ring on her right hand's little finger during her wedding. You can view this ring on the Royal Collection website. The grasping behaviour of the Prince of Wales concerning his mother's jewels could serve as an intriguing plot point in a romance novel. Though not widely known to the general public, many at court and in government circles were aware of his actions. His sisters, being female and unmarried, were his victims, and he took advantage of his position as their guardian after their mother's death. Although George IV's actions occurred shortly after the Regency period, they still fall within the broader historical context and could add depth and intrigue to your Regency romance narrative.